welcome to episode 3 of the Star Sitdown. Today we have the great guest, Professor Gilbert Martinez. How you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm really excited. So how's this semester been for you, doing everything online?
Yeah, so I'm teaching remotely. All my classes are taught completely online. I think it's going well so far. You know, we're in the fourth week. Hard to believe we've been at this for a month, but I feel like I'm in a good rhythm. Really enjoy what I'm teaching. Really love my students, and so far so good, I think.
Good. So tell some of the people about what you do teach at Texas State, because that's one of the big reasons why I wanted you to come on was to have a dialogue about your area.
Yeah, so my main area is media law and ethics. I've been teaching this class for 17 years at Texas State. Really passionate about the topics involving the First Amendment and other issues related to media law, you know, such as libel and privacy, intellectual property. I also teach an honors version of that class. In the past, I've taught it in the spring. Hope to do that again in the future. I've done that for more than 10 years. I've also taught media writing, 1313 in School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I've taught a couple of other classes, but those are the main classes that I teach.
Okay, good. I'm moving a little fast. I'm sorry, I'm excited. We talked briefly about you coming on the sit down at the Camp Star, and I really enjoyed our conversation about kind of the media and the public perception of the media and the trust that's there. Because I have a bunch of like opinions on this topic. I talk to a lot of people who are very opinionated about the media. Obviously, I work at the Star, so I'm with a bunch of journalists and whatnot. So tell me, before we get started into diving into that area, give me a little bit more about your background, because I know you studied at Fordham in New York. I'm from New York, so just give me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the short story, I guess, is that I grew up in South Texas in McAllen. I was very interested in journalism and writing at an early age. I was editor of my high school newspaper. I had an aunt and uncle in New Jersey who were journalists and who I looked up to, and they sort of took me under their wing. I was editor of my college newspaper at UT Pan American, which is now UT Rio Grande Valley. And actually, while I was still in college, I had an internship at a newspaper in Jersey City, New Jersey. And that's what kind of started my journalism career. I had a summer in Washington, D.C. with a Newhouse News Service, which was a great experience for me. And then after I was done with college, I got a job at the Jersey Journal, and I worked there for 4 years before later going on to go to law school at Fordham University School of Law. And when I was done with that, I had a legal fellowship that brought me back to Texas. And the day-to-day practice of law wasn't quite for me, but I transitioned into teaching. So that's what I've been doing for the last 17, 18 years now.
What made you so interested in the topic of media law specifically?
Well, you know, when I was a journalist, I got interested in the law, just generally in the law, because I was a court reporter. I was covering criminal and civil trials. I was spending time with lawyers. I was interviewing judges, covering trials and legal issues. And I guess you could say I drank the Kool-Aid, you know, because everyone was telling me I need to go to law school. And so I really thought about going to law school, not really to become a lawyer, but to become a better reporter. I had these dreams of working for a national publication and covering interesting trials all across the country. And it didn't quite work out that way. I kind of got the law bug a little bit and landed a legal fellowship, you know, back in Texas. But, you know, 3 years of law school and 2 years in a legal fellowship, you know, kind of showed me that going from daily deadlines in a newspaper is very different from working as a lawyer or in a law firm, where sometimes you're working on cases or case law that might take years and years. It just wasn't a good fit for me, and that's what led me to teaching. So media law specifically I'm interested in because of my background as a journalist and because I'm very interested in First Amendment issues, free speech issues in particular. And that's really the bulk of what we teach in media law class. So it's something I'm really passionate about and something I enjoy teaching.
So you had the background as a journalist. You liked being, in the area of law, but you're like, I kind of like going back to my roots of being a journalist, and that's how that got you to teaching.
Yeah, you know, I guess it was a couple of things. I mean, I was at a crossroads of sorts, right? Like if I had spent, 3 years in law school and I decided I wasn't going to work as a lawyer, that just wasn't for me. So what do I do? And I guess I was very lucky, to learn that the law degree is treated as a terminal degree, which means that it qualifies me to teach at the college level. And the only things I felt qualified to teach are really in the area of journalism. And media law is a perfect fit because of my background as a journalist, because of my law degree. And it's worked out very well. I mean, it's a topic that I know a lot about. It's a topic that I have experience with as a journalist, and I can bring those real world experiences when I have class and share with students, and also with student media, like with the University Star, KTSW Radio. So it's been a really good fit for me. So that's been my interest, and that's what really gets me going every day.
Well, I can say it was really nice hearing from you at Camp Star when you did come in, and it was really nice, especially at the end when you were like, are you guys okay? Because often, at least my perspective in higher ed, is that a lot of professors, they don't really do that. You kind of have to go out and talk to them and try and get them to, try and develop a connection. But especially me, because I had never met you before that, you were like, are you guys doing okay? It's really important to take care of your mental health. Don't just focus on school, do what you need to do. So I really appreciate that from you as a professor. And another thing that made me really happy when you were at Camp Star is you actually made it interesting. And that's why I wanted to continue the conversation with you. So, when we talk about like ethics in the media, because this is something I've been so curious about, and I kind of want to go back to what we had talked about beforehand. Like, what is the compass in terms? Because I feel like a lot of people, especially the public, have this perception of the media as they have bias, they're trying to lean me one way or the other, or they have kind of a secret agenda. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, first of all, let me thank you. You're very kind. I try to make a connection with every student, whether they're in my class or whether I meet them through student media or wherever. But I'm glad I'm glad you enjoyed my presentation at Camp Star. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I love being part of that. I love working with Laura Krantz and the student editors and student journalists like yourself. So thank you very much for those kind words. The idea about ethics in journalism is a really large topic, and part of the problem and part of the public misconception, I think, is that they think about the media as kind of like one monolithic thing. And they lump everything together, whether we're talking about news organizations, legacy news organizations like newspapers, or just online news, or if we're talking about these news aggregators that are on one side of the political spectrum or another. It's really a matter of education, or lack of education, where the public may not have an understanding that what they see on their phone, someone shared it on Facebook, let's say, and they'll say, well, there goes the media again. Here's a fake story, or here's a hoax, or here's whatever. But most people don't dig any deeper to find out that, oh, that comes from a joke site. They're making a joke. That's not a serious story. Or the people that are sharing it, really what they're doing is they're exposing their own biases, right? Whatever they think about this current president or about the previous president, or you name it. They see a story, the headline makes them laugh maybe. Oh, I'm going to share this with my followers. I'm going to share this with my friends and family. And next thing you know, this kinds of stuff pollutes our social media feeds, and we don't know what's real or what's not. And some of the advice that I have for my students in my media writing class and also in my media law class is to diversify their news sources and to dig a little deep, to find out where they're getting their news from, and to not just trust everything that comes along. Even something that looks like it's legitimate may actually be from a fake site. So the idea of ethics is that, I think there is lots of great journalism going on. I think there are strong news organizations doing the best they can under these incredible circumstances with the pandemic to keep us informed, to help us make good decisions about a number of issues. It's just that there are also a lot of political influences going on that is interfering with people getting the information they need. Even if it's information that will help them, they're so distrustful, for whatever reason. They've been burned, they had a bad experience, or whatever it is. And there's a lot of mistrust out there. And, I think my perspective is that it seems to me like there's a lot of cynicism out there. And the cynicism, to me, kind of comes along like this. I have a particular point of view, and anything that challenges it must be wrong. So I'm going to disregard that. And anything that comes that confirms what I believe, well, I believe that, and that's the only thing I believe. Now, if you're someone that is logical and reasonable, and if you're someone that uses critical thinking skills, then I suggest you diversify your news sources and you see, like, well, I wonder if this story is true. I wonder, are there other news organizations publishing this? Are they broadcasting this? Is this being reported? And then you can come to a better understanding of what's going on. The thing is that that's hard work. That's not easy. And all of us are busy. All of us want things quick. And so we make shortcuts. And the problem with shortcuts is that it makes us susceptible to being spun one way or the other. And so it's a very complicated topic. And ethics in media, I think there are a lot of journalists and news organizations that are doing a great job upholding their ethical responsibilities, but they get lumped in with everybody else. And that's when it gets confusing, I think.
So do you think a big problem is that a lot of people want to just be right? They don't want to have their views challenged. And do you think that that's like a big issue? Because I think a lot of people in America are really one side or the other. I don't think there are a lot of people that are, or I may be wrong in that those might just be the vocal minorities who are just extremists on one side or the other. Do you think that may be the case, and that just the minorities are the most vocal, and that a lot of people may actually be trying to get real information?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said, because it makes me think about my own thoughts, that I've long thought that, when you think about the political spectrum, it's the ones on the end that make the most noise and get the most attention because they're most extreme or whatever, where most of us are probably somewhere in the middle, where we probably have more in common than we don't, right? I mean, when you think about the protests that have happened on any particular issue, at the core of it, is wanting to be safe, and wanting to not feel like, your life is threatened just because you stepped out your door, and I think that's a common human trait, but it's been turned into this political issue that's being argued and shouted about, and it kind of drowns everything else out. And I think that we create these misunderstandings or misperceptions if we only rely with what we see online. Like, oh, it's so ugly, everyone's so whatever. And we mistake that for the real world. I think at the local level, I think we live around people that agree with us on some issues, may disagree with us sharply on other issues. But I think that we have more in common if we can kind of strip away the kind of prejudices and the discrimination that we all might engage in, whether we're conscious of it or not. But it seems to me that there's a filter when you only look at things through online content or behavior. I think it skews to the extremes, it seems to me.
Why do you think that everything is so easily politicized now? Because I think in this age of we have so much information that a lot of things just seem to become political. The case in point be like the mask. It became a political debate when it was, initially based off science. Do you think that some people may use the media as a scapegoat for the politicism of a lot of these topics today?
Yeah, I think people are going to do that, no matter what the issue is. Like, I don't really think this is anything new. It's just very pronounced right now. And it's especially pronounced because this is a serious matter, this pandemic. And there's a political fight over whether we should listen to scientists and doctors and the scientific method about how to keep us safe. And we have some examples all around the world, countries that have taken measures, that have done things, and they're at a different place than the United States currently.
Mm-hmm.
And that does raise some questions about, are we doing everything we can to minimize the spread of this pandemic? There's a lot of concern about winter coming on and the flu season. How is that going to impact? coronavirus, COVID-19. And it has become a political issue, and it's most unfortunate because I think that it is contributing to suffering. It's contributing to people knowingly or unknowingly getting injured, getting hurt. Some people aren't able to work right now, because they can't do their work remotely. So that's bad. But there's also people who have families to support. They have to do jobs and they're on the front lines. They don't have a choice in the matter. So they got to do whatever they can to be safe, and hopefully their companies are providing, what they need to be safe. But it's a really difficult situation, and everybody needs to kind of determine, well, what's most important. And some people say, look, it's the economy that's most important. People need to make money. They need to work. And then others say, well, should profits come over lives? And so you can easily see how this becomes very personal. Some people have lost loved ones in this fight. We also have seen that COVID-19 affects communities of color at a much greater rate than others. And that's very concerning because the death toll continues to rise. As a country, we're approaching 200,000 deaths. And those are 200,000 lives. And imagine everybody, that love those people, family members, friends, maybe people, I know people who've been infected. So it's not an easy situation by any stretch. But I think it's really related to politics and power and money and sort of the struggle over those things, and exposes, some questions about our society. And is this the way that we want it? Is this the way that we want to continue it? In some ways, this is what the presidential election is about, where you have candidates that are expressing certain points of view, and then the American people are going to go to the ballot box and make a decision, and we'll see what happens in November. But this is the political process, right? You probably have heard this before, where you've heard someone say, well, everything's political.
Yeah.
And, you can really identify that when you think about access to education, when you think about loans, when you think about purchasing a house. You're probably going to purchase a house later on in life, but that's something, you want to know if you're going to be treated fairly. You want to know if you're going to have the same access, to loans to purchase a home, a long-term loan, access to jobs, access to education, as I mentioned. So this is where things do become political very, very quickly. Yeah, it's true.
So another thing that I'm very interested about is obviously we're in the age of information, and information is so easy to get. I can do a Google search, get results in under a second about anything. So do you feel like part of the reason that it's so easy for people to have this distrust in the media and maybe not believe in science and maybe believe these famous political figures is because there's so much information, and that there's so much, and some people are like, well, I don't want to have to look at this article and then have to look up another article that's giving me different information, and I have to think for myself. So I'm just going to give up, I'm just going to say it is what it is. I'm just going to get information from these people. I like these people. Do you think that's a big reason why everything is so easily politicized and why misinformation is so rampant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a contributing factor. And look, I'm an educator. This is my profession. I really think it comes down to media literacy, right? It's about educating people about where to find reliable pieces of information, reliable news, that they can use to make decisions in their lives. This is not easy. You're right. People are busy. They don't have time to analyze every single thing, but they can make the effort to find reliable news sources. And there's studies that show where news organizations fall on sort of like a bias chart. And if you rely on sources that are more in the middle, they're more objective, they're more neutral, then you're less likely to be spun one way or the other. You're more likely to get a broader perspective on what's really going on, whether it's about the election, the pandemic, you name it, the economy, whatever. But it takes some effort, and to me, that's about media literacy. It's also about all of us have a personal responsibility. If we are on social media and we're connected with friends and family, and we're sharing things just willy-nilly, just whatever, well, it made me laugh, I shared it, this, and whatever, then what you're doing is you're polluting, as I mentioned earlier, I think, you're polluting the social media feed. And so me personally, if someone is sharing things that clearly are not true, clearly are just trying to get a rise out of people or whatever, well, that's not someone that I'm interested in hearing more from. And I'm not a censorship guy, right? As a free speech guy, but I don't feel like I need to engage, with someone that's doing that, because to me that's not someone that's engaging in the real world. So again, we all have a responsibility. We should think twice before we share something. We should be open-minded, and some of these things sound almost un-American. Where you mentioned something earlier about how everyone always wants to be right. I think it's the opposite. I think it's more healthy to think, well, maybe I'm not right, maybe I'm wrong, because that's what leads to meaningful conversation. So here's my opinion about immigration, the election, the environment, global change, whatever. But I might be wrong. So why don't you tell me what you think? What have you read? Wow, I never thought about it that way before. I should do some more investigating. Let me see. To me, that's a mature adult way to approach these things. Not, I'm right, you're wrong, so you should shut up and you should just keep listening to me because I know better than you. And nobody wants to hear that. But I think as human beings, we want to be right, but we need to do the work to say, well, this is what I think about global warming. This is what I think about climate change. And here's why I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And you can apply that to anything. We all make choices whether we're going to wear a mask when we walk out the door. We all make that decision, but then it becomes a political fight over whether the grocery store can require masks, whether the governor can order that masks be worn or not, whether the president should say something or not. And again, so look how quickly it becomes political, but everything's political.
Do you think that, like we said earlier, that like people, they don't really want to do the work. They're busy and everything, and they're getting a lot of this information from like just TV because they might even have the time to read, or like clips from Twitter, from maybe like CNN, Fox, OWN, all these different networks. How do you think those? Because I was gonna ask you this later, but I feel like now is a good time to kind of put this in about the control that these networks have and like the hierarchy at these networks. Because if I'm sure you heard in if not earlier this week but last week, there was clips surfacing of the CEO of CNN talking about Trump and how great of a guy he was, and then there was Cuomo talking to I think it was Trump's lawyer several years back and giving him legal advice. But CNN as a network is doing all this anti-Trump, 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 anti-Republican. But then you have the CNN talking great about the guy. It's like it just becomes so hard. And I'll say this, for me personally, to just get information and just find a lot of these big news organizations trustworthy. I feel like a lot of local level things, like maybe the Daily Texan, the University Star, the Texas Tribune, just off the top of my head, much more engaged and targeted towards the community, are much more trustworthy. But a lot of people don't really go to these outlets for their information, so they're getting it from these big news corporations. So how is like the public able to get trust in those? Or if they're struggling to trust those, what advice would you have for people to get better information?
Yeah, great question, and it's a real challenge because people have limited time. They're living under tremendous stress and circumstances, and so it's probably not on the top of their list, right? To get reliable information unless it directly impacts them, right? And so I think that it really comes from experience. This is not you flip the switch and you're done. You don't push a button and you say, okay, there, I solved the issue of getting reliable information. I'm glad that's done. What's next on my list? That is something we do every single day and that we do over time. So I would say, the major broadcast networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, they all do an excellent job providing national news, and talking about what's going on with the wildfires in Oregon and California, or the flooding going on in Louisiana and in the South because of Hurricane Sally. I think we can rely on those news organizations because they have a long track record of being reliable. What people have to understand is not to mistake whether they don't like criticism of their politician for unreliable news. And that's the difficult thing for people to kind of separate. That politicians are in office and their number one goal is to remain in office. And so they're going to respond to negative coverage. But the press and news organizations, their goal, their role is to be accountable, or to hold government officials accountable. They act on behalf of the people. And that's the real challenge here, because people don't always believe what they're getting from these news organizations. Now, they're not perfect. They're human institutions. They're going to make mistakes. But I think by and large, these are news organizations, these cable news organizations, online news organizations. You mentioned Texas Tribune, an excellent online news source in Texas. They have an excellent track record for representing the people, holding government and public figures accountable for the people. And they have a track record of reliability. But this is why it's important to diversify your news sources, so that you don't get fooled, so that you don't think that this story is true when no one else is reporting it. There might be a reason why no one else is reporting it. But you only know that if you can diversify your news sources, or if you find news sources that are more down the middle rather than partisan on one side or the other. A real challenge, though. It's not easy at all. Not easy at all.
No, it's not, and it gets frustrating talking to people, about a wide variety of topics, and they're just so honed in on their own mindset about, I'm going to learn everything about this and ignore the other side. I'm going to adjust my thinking to align with what I've heard, what I've read, and not take criticism or any other opinions or valid criticisms of my own ideology. And I think that's like what you said earlier, is that people just need to diversify where they get information. I've definitely tried to do that, especially during this time of the pandemic, because I found myself watching a lot of things that I was agreeing with, and that, like, I was like, yeah, they're right. But I had to catch myself, and I'm like, oh, this is hand tailored for me and my way of thinking. So I definitely think getting out of that bubble is a great way to just learn more about, like, the world as a whole, because I feel like a lot of people get caught up in their bubbles and just in their social ways. So to kind of veer topics a bit, what was your just give me an overall how you feel about, like, everything going on, not necessarily now because it's not the height, but like with the protest, kind of like it goes in line with the First Amendment, because a lot of people had their First Amendment suppressed, maybe by the police, the media, people attacking reporters. What's your take on that?
So on one hand, I'm very encouraged to see that people are so passionate that they're speaking out about issues that have long been in our communities and in our country, things that have got swept away, things that have been ignored for far too long. It's really chilling to me. I was born in the 1960s, but I didn't experience the civil rights movement. That's something I learned in history books like you and many others. Yet what I learned about the civil rights movement, I see some similarities going on today, with reaction by police, with the suppression of these expressions, but I also see a lot of a reason for hope. I do see some changes occurring. I do see that these conversations are enduring, that they haven't been swept under the rug, that, especially Black Lives Matter movement has really taken on a force, to be reckoned with. And that's affecting the presidential election. They're talking about issues involving, how to reallocate funds, away from police into mental health services or other emergency services, and so there are discussions that I think are valuable, and there's civic engagement. People are participating, they're expressing their opinions, and of course, there are going to be people that have opposing opinions. And the way that we resolve those kinds of issues, that we've always done in our country, is to do it at the ballot box. We vote for representatives, and this is a representative democracy. They are supposed to represent our interests, and then they create laws that are supposed to improve society for everyone. so that we can live up to our ideals about justice and equality for everybody. And so on one hand, when I see these protests, there are people that are saying that we are not, as a country, living up to the ideals that we said we were going to live up to. And to me, that's a problem. If people don't have equity and access to justice and to living the life that they want in the way that they envision, the pursuit of happiness, as Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. So these are issues that are very difficult, and I'm particularly worried about journalists being attacked in some documented cases by police officers, even those who are wearing press credentials. There have been some in the last week, and that is highly disturbing to me for people whose job it is to cover these protests, to inform the rest of us about what's going on. And we have a violent response from a group that should not respond in that way to somebody that's simply covering an event. So my background as a journalist, of course, I teach in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm particularly concerned about treatment of journalists, but also concerned about the treatment of citizens when they're expressing themselves. There seems to be a double standard in how police respond to some protesters on some issues versus other protesters on another issue. To me, those are like red flags going up, saying, that there's something not quite right. People need to be heard on this issue, and we need to do something about it. We can't just give it lip service and expect it to go away. And I think there's a lot of staying power here for a lot of these protesters, because they're seeing that their voices are being heard. They're seeing that the possibility for change maybe has never been greater. And we'll see what happens in the coming months. But this is a long-term deal. This is not going to fix itself, in a matter of days or weeks or months. This may take years, but we can improve, and we can try to improve things for everyone, but it's going to take all of us. And that's not going to be easy. So that's kind of my perspective as a journalism instructor, kind of watching this, but also very interested in the free speech issues, of course, because that's my area.
So, have you brought up the free speech issues? Because do you feel like, in some sense, kind of the First Amendment, not to be dramatic, is like under attack? Because you see, like, for example, in D.C. when Trump took the photo op with the Bible, and they were gassing the people that were peacefully protesting in the front, or in Portland, all the people that were protesting peacefully. And do you feel like that's getting in that area of kind of just suppressing these people's their voices? And do you feel like that's setting a precedent to where, if it's not going to be punished now, it's going to keep happening? That's my fear.
Yeah,
so
so
I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Pardon me. I didn't mean to speak over you.
Oh, no, you're good.
It's not a legal precedent, but it is disturbing if you have the president or the executive branch or government officials make decisions based on political reasons for how there's going to be a police response and how they're going to respond. That's a big concern. And I think that's what a lot of people are seeing, some people for the first time. It really makes you question, whether we're in a country that believes in these values of free speech. We say we do. And I think that there's lots of evidence that people do have the right to free speech, because we see all sorts of opinions being expressed, right? So I don't think we're at the point where the free speech rights are going away, but we have in law, we talk about the chilling effect. The chilling effect is when government acts in a certain way to silence people, or to suggest that they might be threatened if they express a wrong opinion or an opinion they don't like. And so I think these very strong displays of strength by police officers using tear gas, for example, which is illegal in international context and should not be used on US citizens. And yet they feel like this is necessary to control a crowd or to do whatever. That's a big concern for me about why is that happening? Should that be happening? Does that raise questions about whether some people are not enjoying their First Amendment rights or have access to the same First Amendment rights as others? I think it's real telling, for example, when you have people that protest on the other side of the political spectrum, say about protesting against the mask mandates. Police aren't responding to that with tear gas or with attack dogs or with water hoses. People aren't getting shot in those situations. And why is that? And I don't think it's a random thing, but it's laid to bear. I mean, I think the facts are before us, and to not grapple with those and have a reckoning of understanding, why is this happening? What can we do to be better? How can we live up to the ideals of our country that we say that we have? Again, it's going to take all of us to do that.
What do you think is going to happen in terms of the media landscape with the upcoming election? Like, how do you think the results of that is going to affect what role the media plays? Because I think currently, and frankly, over these past couple of years, with the coining of the term fake news, it's become kind of just a scapegoat for a lot of people, politicians especially, and mainly on the right wing, but there are definitely left wing people that just say, this is bad coverage about me, it's fake. So I think it's going to be interesting how after this election, whoever wins, Biden or Trump, how the media is. So I just want to get your take on that.
Yeah, so it's a hard question to answer, right? Because I wish I had a crystal ball and tell you what's going to happen. Nobody knows. But I think the role of news organizations is not to be one-sided or the other. I think their role is to hold government accountable for their actions, no matter who's in office. So I would expect, no matter what happens in November with the election, no matter who the next president is, whether Trump is reelected or we have a new president in Biden, I would expect news organizations to continue to do what they do, and that is to represent the people, to hold government accountable, because the government has power over our lives. They can make our lives very difficult. They can make our lives impossible to live. This is part of the outcry of the Black Lives Matter movement. They feel like they're being subjected to violence, to state-instituted violence, and something needs to be done. This needs to stop. And the use of smartphones and videos documents this time and time again. Why does this keep happening? Like, why are there images of Black people who are struggling under a police grappling and saying that they can't breathe and then dying in police custody? That has got to stop when there is not a threat of violence, when there is not a struggle where a police officer truly has his or her life in danger. The job of police is very difficult. I mean, there's no question about that. But these videos really expose something kind of ugly about our world and our country. Again, I didn't mean to trail off a little bit, but that's kind of where the question.
You're good. You're really good.
That's where the question took me. But your question about covering the election and the aftermath. My hope is that news organizations continue to do what they do, and that is to do their best to inform us so that we can make the best decisions we can. Because again, I think there are a lot of hardworking journalists that are out there. There are lots of good news organizations that are trying to inform us, and I would expect that they would continue to do that.
So based off your response, I could tell, this time period of all these protests and uproar and just social unrest is really like sparked in you. Would you say so?
Well, I mean, it's something I'm very interested in because it's directly related to the topics that I teach my students. And I tell my students, I think they can tell that I'm passionate about these issues. And part of the reason I love teaching the media law class in particular is because every semester is different. There's new stuff that happens that's directly related. We just covered a flag burning in my media law class. And at the political rally in Las Vegas, the president said that, in his view, that someone that burns a flag should be jailed for a year and fined. And the Supreme Court, more than 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago, 31 years ago, ruled that flag burning is protected by the First Amendment as a form of symbolic expression. So we can agree or disagree whether you should burn a flag or not. But is it protected by the First Amendment? Well, yes, it is a symbolic speech because that's what the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in cases in 1989 and 1990. Now, the president can have an opinion. He expressed it. But again, it just goes to show how relevant to me the media law class is, because it's media law is happening all around us. And I endeavor to make that connection for my students so that they can see it's not just a history class. We're not just talking about a case from 50 years ago. It's got great relevance to everything going on today. So that's how I kind of think about those things.
Another question I wanted to ask you was, in terms of dealing with ignorance around people who just like we talked about earlier, who are just dead set on their opinion, what's the best way to go at them? Because I know you and I had talked about, presenting the facts. Like, hey, look, this is what happened. This is the aftermath of that happened, and this is how we need to go forward. Then these are facts. How do you go against somebody that's like, well, that's what the media wants you to think. They're brainwashing you. You can't listen to them. Look at this instead. How do you go about that? Because I find myself very frustrated in that, like, this is real life. I'm not, nobody's trying to pull a joke on you. So I understand that to a certain extent you can only combat ignorance so much, and the best way to combat ignorance is with information and education. But it gets frustrating for me personally. So I just wanted to see if maybe you have some knowledge that I don't.
I don't know that I have any knowledge that you don't, but I think what I would say is that it's important to remember our humanity and the humanity of people around us, even those that we might consider to be ignorant, or to not have the same privilege that we do, right? We operate on a college campus. We're privileged because we have access to education. I've had access to multiple levels of education. I've been very lucky and fortunate. And I use that in my job every day. You're fortunate because you work for a student media organization. You're a college student. You have access to resources that a lot of people in the community don't have access to, for a variety of reasons. So I think responding with empathy is always a good first step. And so if someone is shouting in your face, you can say, look, I'll talk to you about this, but we can't really have a meaningful conversation if all you want to do is shout at me. And so when you decide you don't want to shout at me anymore, or if you're using, vulgar language, or if you're calling me names, I'm sorry, but I just don't think this can be productive. Sometimes, we have to respect ourselves enough to disengage in those situations. But otherwise, if someone says, I think you're being fooled, look at what I read, and you can say, well, okay, I took a look at what you read. And I found that, it comes from this site that's known for having unreliable information, for jokes. They also did this and this and this. Here are some sources I read. Let me share them with you. These news organizations that are more down the middle, these scientific organizations or whatever. I get that frustration happens, but if you don't respond with empathy, then you never even get to that point where someone says, you know what, I took a step back, I took a look at what you shared with me, and I think you're right about this. And now a dialogue has started. Now, that's not always going to happen. That's ideal. But again, if you're not so sure you're right, okay, what I said earlier. So you come at me with something and I say, no, you're wrong. And you say, no, I'm right. Here it is. I just read it. This is true. You see, if you respond that way, people are going to shut down. Right? But if you respond, with more compassion, with more empathy, and say, well, I've never thought about that before. I've never seen that article. Well, let me take a look. It's like, well, I'm not sure I trust where that information's coming from. I don't know who put that out. I've never heard of this news organization. I don't see other news organizations reporting this. But see, that's part of that comes from a college education. Part of that comes from thinking critically, of trying to weigh different things so that we can make a determination. But not everybody's going to want to do that, and you're not going to be able to reach everybody. But it's understandable to be frustrated. You have your buddies, talk to them and say, oh, I'm so frustrated, I can't believe this. Vent to them. I mean, that's what they're there for. But as a member of a student news organization, don't make that part of your public persona on social media, right? Like take a more middle ground, take a more, reasonable approach. It's like, okay, I'll hear you out, but then also set boundaries. If you start calling me names, if you start shouting at me, well, then I just don't think this can be a meaningful conversation. But otherwise, let's talk.
Well,
Um,
I will say it's not necessarily to the point of like, anger and rage. It's more of just like, dude, like these this is the real information. And I don't really talk about a lot of the stuff on my social, and like I'm not very confrontational in that aspect, but it's just more so you see something and you shake your head, and then maybe you see a buddy talk about it, and you guys you may disagree, but you're like, look, this is real. I'm not trying to pull a fast one on you. This is the
right,
information, and I think, like you said, I honestly think that's what's missing in a lot of what's happening in America. A lot of people aren't willing to step out of their own shoes and just
hmm
say, "Oh wow, this is what the reality is for somebody who's not me." And I agree heavily with that point. And yeah, that was really good information. Thank you.
well, you're welcome. And think about it this way also. Think about your own journey. Like maybe there was an issue that you were sure about until you learned more, until you thought critically, until you got the right information, the real information, and then you changed your mind on something. Well, everybody that you encounter, they're at a different point in that journey. So consider that they're really reflections of yourself. Maybe someone less educated at this point in time than you are right now. Maybe someone that doesn't have access to education. Maybe someone that hasn't responded with, well, I'll listen to what you have to say and let's share some ideas. They're at a different point in their journey. But none of that happens if we let the frustration take over and say, okay, I'm done. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Forget it. Well, then you've missed out on the opportunity to actually have a meaningful conversation. Again, this isn't easy and it's not for everybody. And we have to pick and choose when we're going to decide to do that. Some people have decided that they want to do that online all the time, and that can be exhausting. We're busy enough as it is. But if you have neighbors, people in your apartment complex, if you have friends of friends, those might be the opportunities, family members even, where you can have those kinds of conversations. So when someone says something about, the Democrats and a child sex ring, and oh my gosh, can you believe it? And you're like, that's not true information, based on the sources that I have. And, the more that you say that, the more you're showing your own ignorance about that. So
Right.
let's talk about it. Where are you getting that information from? What here are some stories that show that that's not what's going on. And at some point you might just have to say, okay, we're just not going to agree. And so for a lot of families, it's kind of been fractured that way, where you have families that don't agree on things, and it's very, very difficult and very tough.
I think you're 100% right. Especially to the point where everybody is on a different path. Because there were definitely things 2 years ago I had no idea about. I was just single-minded one way of thinking, and then different people were educating me about privilege and different things, that adversity that other people face that I don't. And that's really what made me more empathetic. So I definitely agree with you with that. I think, like you said, in terms of just saying, "Hey, look, this is the information. You can do what you want. I'm gonna put in as much as I can, but I'm not gonna break my back over trying to help you and give you the right information." So I definitely think you're right in that aspect. I hope a lot more people can take that mindset. I think it's really important, and I think that's what we're missing, especially now in this political climate. And I think, as we talked about earlier, not too many people are on polar opposites. A lot more people are in the middle. So I think that kind of brings us hope, and that maybe we can have some in between, some in between. I think that'd be really progressive in terms of where this country can go.
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree. I agree.
I think we're going to end it on that note. I've kept you for a while. We're almost out of time. Thank you again for coming on. Seriously, it means a lot. I really enjoyed our conversation. And I learned more than I had known prior about the media and the importance of the media has on the public and just the overall knowledge. So thank you again.
Of course. Thank you very much for the invitation. I greatly enjoyed this conversation. It was a continuation of what we did at Camp Star, and look forward to talking to you more in the future. Thank you so much for the invitation, Kim.
Me too. Thank you, Professor Martinez. I will see everybody next Friday. Star Sit Down. Had a lot of fun. Bye bye.